All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, to an episode of Future Focused, where we are continuing to navigate life at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Today, we're going to be talking about how we prepare the next generation. So often we're so focused on ourselves, we don't think about the fact that there's people coming after us, and I'm keenly aware of this with 7 kids. So we're going to talk about what does it look like to prepare those next generations for what work is going to look like in a very different world. And to navigate that conversation with me, I'm joined by Dr. Phil Hickman, who is the founder and CEO of PlaBook. So for those who may not be familiar with you, can I call you Phil? Do you like Dr. Phil, Dr. Hick? What's the best way for me to address you throughout this?
Well, you can address me however you want to. I mean, I've been called
Oh, you're
worse things.
leaving
How
it
about
open. You're putting it on me. Okay. Because I'm so casual that I would probably just call you Phil, but I don't want to, if you're like, no,
That's
I
fine.
prefer. Okay. All right. All right. Well, then it's going to be
No, that-
Phil. So
that's totally fine.
for those who, hey, I ask because I'm Christopher and people always say Chris. And I'm like, well, that's not really my name, but okay, fine. So for
Yeah,
those who don't know you,
on a
what's
side
that?
note, in school, my mother used to get mad when people called me Phil. I
Oh,
named you
she did.
Phil.
So your mom named you Philip and she didn't like the Phil. So, and just so you know, I love these sidebars because it just helps me understand everybody's story in this. What made you change? What made you decide to go with Phil versus Philip?
It's almost like conceding to it. Just everybody called me Phil. Seriously,
Really? So it was just like everybody
big
just did. So
deal.
you're like, you know what? I'm not going to fight the battle.
Yep, I just gave up.
I love it. I love it. Well, I am still fighting that battle. I actually went by Chris in my high school years and in early years for the reason you described. I was just
Right.
like, why even try and do it? And I was back in the age of crisscross. And so I actually tried to change my name to KRIS because I thought it was really cool and whatever. And apparently you can't just change your name, but you learn those things. But what's funny is then I don't know if it was after college or what, I decided I actually don't like Chris. I actually really don't like it
Oh,
at
really?
all. Yeah, I did not like it. And so I started being like, well, I'm not a jerk, so I'm not going to get really intense with people, but I am going to start saying Christopher. And if people say Chris, I will try and go, it's Christopher in a nice way. But I can tell you, it's a hard road. So maybe just stick with Phil. So, but anyway, all that to say, background for you. Tell folks a little bit about you and your journey because you did not start as a tech CEO and founder. That was not where you got your start.
I didn't. I didn't. I started in education. I have
Yeah.
5 graduate degrees and a doctorate, working on another graduate degree as
Wait,
well,
what? You have 5 graduate degrees right now and you're working on another one?
and a doctorate. Yeah, and then so 7, and working on another one right now. Yes,
Okay.
MBA. I didn't. I don't have an MBA, so I was working on my
Okay.
MBA.
Well, we'll
So I'm
talk
finishing up.
backstage on this one because I've gone back and forth on this. We won't make the podcast about this. I promise people listening, we will get into it. But I will talk backstage because I've gone back and forth on that. I've got a grad degree in education. I've debated doing business. I've debated doing my PhD type of a thing. But we will not discuss that here. So holy cow, when you say you're an education person, you legit are an education person.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and I did everything in the field of education. So start out as a sub assistant teacher, a teacher. I was a school psychologist, counselor, assistant principal, principal at all areas,
Wow.
all
So you
levels.
went
And then,
through the diversity of the different roles because I was a middle school teacher for a period of time, and not everybody in the academic system there's a lot of different functions. So you actually
yeah.
spanned the broad spectrum of academia.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Principal. I was in central office, director of education, a director of special education, and I was a superintendent. I was an area superintendent in Houston. I had 300 schools, 210,000 students. Superintendent in Mississippi, and then I was a national ambassador for the United States Department of Education. So I did all that, before I started, and then I did some consulting for Apple and Amazon. Worked extensively for Oracle,
Yeah, can I
and then
pause you there?
after,
So
yeah,
That's not usually the trajectory I hear from folks in academia. You were doing all the academic stuff, then you consulted with Apple and Amazon. How did you make that shift from academia to consulting with big tech?
Well, really, it started out with some of the products that they had, within
Okay.
school districts. We were looking for someone who was an expert. I taught myself how to code. So I taught myself, and then I went to a boot camp in Kansas City.
Okay.
And then once I learned code and start helping developing products, kind of did some work with them. And like I said, did some extensive work with Oracle for about 3 years. And then I realized that one, the knowledge that I had, I had to develop and work with products that they already had, partly developed. And
Yep.
I felt like it was a bunch of folks that were outside of education that were developing technology that they felt was appropriate for
They
education
thought
based on
from
their
where they are, hey,
experience. Yeah,
this
based on
is
their
what you need,
capability.
but they didn't have the internal
Yeah.
expertise.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
and the thought was there, but to think about implementation and how does that really look in the classroom,
Yeah.
just all those kind of things, I thought was left out. And
Okay.
so I developed PlaBook, which is an innovative reading technology that uses artificial intelligence and natural language processing and speech recognition to help children learn how to read. One of the
Okay.
innovative things that I did with that was the way we teach reading now is we quietly have a child read a paragraph and then answer multiple choice questions.
Okay.
That's how we assess reading. I'm sorry, and that's
Yeah.
actually only reading comprehension. Has nothing to do with basic reading. The real issue is
Right.
that people spend so much energy trying to decode and break down text that they don't have anything left. And so I invented the first technology that allows you not only to hear a person read, with regular speech recognition, but we
Mm.
can hear all the way down to the phonemic level. So we can break down the unit of speech. So if you read the word bat, we can hear b at or the lack thereof and
Okay.
put an
So you're
analysis in there.
fundamentally deconstructing as they're reading back
Oh
every
yeah.
little bit of detail to
Yep.
understand where
And
there's
then using
opportunity.
using AI. Oh yeah.
Okay.
And then using
So,
AI to offer personalized recommendations and those kind of things and gamification for the student.
okay. So I want to dig into that, but before I do, it's funny you talked about how these big tech companies were creating technology for schools and you were going, well intended, but you don't understand.
Right.
You don't understand. And I see that happen on the corporate space a lot. I see these tech vendors that go, here's a problem in an organization. We've solved it. But you can tell that it's like, but you haven't worked in an organization and understand how it operates. And so while in theory, yes, in theory, what you're doing makes cognitive sense. In practice, it just doesn't work that way. And it's really interesting how some of those things can have such a huge effect on things. And I see that, honestly, I see it in a lot of different sectors where it's being created
Yeah.
by someone who goes, I think this is the problem. And maybe it's a legitimate problem, but there's a lot of other barriers and factors that figure into how do you actually make something work in an organization. That can be a huge barrier to adoption.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And the fact that it can be sold as a solution, like you said, it could to upper level management, right? To principals and superintendents. But when it's laid out in a classroom, it's just
Yeah.
not, it just doesn't, like
That's
you
one of
said,
the
the
biggest
adoption.
challenges I see everywhere is a lot of times the people making decisions about it aren't the ones who actually use it. And so
Yeah.
a decision maker
And
goes,
then,
wow, that
wow.
sounds like that would solve a problem for my people. Let's get it.
Yep.
And they go, why is nobody using this product? And then if you
Yeah.
actually spend time with people, they go, oh, well, I could have told you that doesn't do anything for me based on how work actually gets done. And the
Yeah.
amount of money wasted on digital transformation for that exact reason is in the billions on an annual basis.
I agree. I agree. I totally
Okay.
agree.
Okay.
Like you said,
So that's awesome. So you
people
took your
like,
sub. Now, did you have a technical bend before you kind of started doing the consulting and getting involved in that? Because to go from, I'm in academia, I'd done psychology, teaching, substituting, being a principal, assistant principal, to I consulted with big tech. I taught myself to code. I went and built an AI platform. Did you see that trajectory at all? Was there something early on, or was it just kind of as you grew and evolved, you went, nah, actually, I'm figuring this out as I go?
Yeah, I had dreams early on. So,
Okay, you did.
um, meaning my brother and sister had to go to summer school, and they were in high school. She's 3 years older. My brother's 2 years older, and so I
Okay.
was in middle school. Of course, during the summer, I couldn't be left alone, so I had to go to summer school, high school summer school with them. And at the
So you had to
time, the
suffer
only
alongside with them.
right, right, and the only enrichment program that they had was a technology class where and it was to show you my age. It was DOS. It was the blue
Oh
screen and
yeah.
all those kind of things.
Oh yeah. C
We were
prompt.
yeah,
Yep.
we
C
were
colon.
introduced to yeah. Oh man. But I fell in love with technology. I fell in love with
Okay.
it. And then of course went to high school, and it was like we learned typing with the typewriter until my senior year. And that's when we started to get introduced to technology. And it was just I wasn't a digital native in that sense, didn't have all the
Okay.
resources and so I kind of just dabbled in it and always, but not something that I majored in or until boot camps came along. One of the things that I
Yeah.
did, the reason why I learned about boot camps is because I didn't want the same thing that happened to me happen to other students. So I started a couple of nonprofits, coding academies for children.
Okay.
And so I started some, nonprofit coding academies, Mississippi Coding Academy and We Code KC. And then once I did that, then I started getting introduced to adult boot camps,
Okay.
and that's
Okay.
when I joined
Now
it.
on
Yeah,
that one, on the accessibility piece, because again, for people who, especially if you're digital native, if you're younger, technology is so prevalent now. It's hard to imagine this, but I mean, I remember back in the early days of technology, access was a very limiting factor for a lot of people. I mean, the
yeah,
idea that everybody had a computer in their home. I mean, I remember in my high school that it was you were an exception if you had it was just starting to become a little more mainstream, but even then, it your financial access played a big role in that because even the
oh yeah,
home desktop computer was $2,700 for like a gateway desktop type of thing, which that's not easily
gateway.
accessible. That's not something that everybody just was like, yeah, back in the 90s, let's drop 3 grand on a computer that barely even had internet access. And people were going, what's the internet type of a thing?
Yeah, I tell you, we so the other cheat sheet that I had is I had all the computers actually at home, Commodore 64. I had all the, but they didn't necessarily work. And no, there was not internet back then. It was, you had a floppy
Yeah,
disk and or a hard disk. My dad worked for UPS, and he would service real wealthy
got it.
neighborhoods, and they will utilize at that point in time their technology until you cannot anymore, and they will buy a new one, and my dad will buy the scraps. And so
Ah,
even a floppy disk. And so not that we knew what to do with it. Of course we were playing games on it, those kind of things, but again, my love was just continually
yeah.
played with and cycled through with technology without having any formal training. And like you just said, in a sense, with access, but also there was a mental access. Like we didn't know anyone who was majored in computers or understood computers or those kind of things.
No.
So it was more of a dream in a sense, and that those
Yeah.
people who are geniuses, do computers and not
Oh
me.
yeah, I
So
mean, I grew
yeah,
up in a town of like 800 in the sticks of
yep,
Minnesota, and the only reason I had access to a computer was because my uncle worked in a big tech company, and he'd send me like his old ones, and I'm like, oh,
yep,
cool, and you figured them out. But if you needed help, there was no Google that you could look things up, and where I lived, there was nobody who even lived in the area that did things with computers, so you were on your own.
yeah,
You really were.
yep. You're right.
It was a different time. So then let's talk a little bit about the education piece and why that piece is so important, because obviously you've taken this awesome kind of spectrum that you've been on and said, you know what, I want to commit my resources and time and energy to using artificial intelligence around reading, which is an interesting
Right.
take given what we just talked about technology. But I think I see the connection between the two. But I'm really curious what made you go, this is really where I want to lean in on this.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The aspect of working in school systems and then at a macro level with the federal government, um, it's just the data that I saw nationwide. To me, it was a level of national security that we have to figure out something.
Okay.
76% of fourth graders in the entire United States read below grade level, regardless of social
Really?
economical status, race, gender. Yeah. And the pandemic made it worse.
That's
That
three
was
out of four
2019,
kids.
2019's data. And then, of course, basically, what I tell everybody is the future is now, and we're already late. And so, what I mean by that is our school systems are not necessarily preparing kids for their future, but for our past.
Yeah.
And so, one of the most eye-opening thing to me was that the way the global ecosystem is going to evolve. We already have now what people are not really paying attention to is let's look at even the job market. Before we just had to compete with our local neighbors for a job, or you know,
Yeah.
now it's a global ecosystem, and so you're not competing against your local neighbor. You're not competing against the
No,
next state over. You're competing against the world
the
for a
world.
position. Yeah, oh
Yep.
yeah, because if you look at most people were stuck in blue collar automation, but white collar automation is happening so fast, and
Yeah.
so and then you start looking at white collar automation, meaning that lawyers, AI, and those kind of things can find information faster than if you had
Well, I
another
was just
lawyer
going to
working on it.
say on this topic, I'm talking with a company, and there's a couple of them that now going back to this, who you're competing against. I'm
Yeah,
talking with a company and I've gotten to know a founder of a company that is you can hire AI people. You can hire AI
yeah.
employees and you put in the criteria of exactly, I need them to have this skill level and all this stuff. And for a fraction of the cost, you can hire an AI employee. So going back to your point of your competition and who you're competing against went from micro, kind of relatively small fishbowl to the universe almost in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, and there's a dichotomy of that too, because you're dealing with the humans universally, and now technology as well.
Yeah.
And so you're no longer it's no longer to be okay to be the top of your school, and your school's curriculum or access is not as high as the next school, right? Is I mean
Yep.
that's no longer okay. And so how do we prepare children for the future? And they even
Yeah.
said that in 2030, 2000 between 2030 and 2040, 85% of the jobs that will exist have not been invented yet. They have not even been created, but they will have
That's
some
not that
aspect
far
of
off either, if you think about it.
not that far off, right? But they will
Six
have
years.
technology, yeah, technology and reading proficiency. And one of
Yep.
the things that happened, the reason why that push
To
is so
wait,
fast
before you
now.
go on, to drill back, to peel back what you said is even those
Okay,
85%, if I'm understanding you correct, the 85% that haven't been created, but that will be here in 2023, one of the underlying consistencies that if I'm understanding, is that reading proficiency. It's one of those, like,
yep.
even though it's a new job that doesn't exist, it'll be completely different. The constant will be, yes, but you will still need to be able to read and understand well to do that job, whatever it is. Is that accurate?
The reason is because this you're very accurate. The
Okay.
skill that we appreciate in education right now is memorization and regurgitating facts. That
Yes.
student is your top student. That little
Yep.
black box in your hand is have all the information in the world. So now it's how do I critically read through this and critically apply it? It's how do I look at what's false information, what's true information, what's important, what's not, and the reason why that's important, it's gonna happen at such a constant, is because even the form of intelligence that is appreciated is the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Because the
Yes.
shelf life of technology is so fast, your job is never going to be the same at one given point in time. It's
No.
going to constantly switch. And people right now are uncomfortable with pivoting and switching and being flexible, but that's a skill
Yep.
that's going to be important for the future.
Oh, huge. And I mean, I see this. My regular job is the chief learning officer for a big healthcare company, and so career development and internal mobility is where I spend all my time. And when I look at the half life of skills and how quickly jobs change. And somebody who's hired into this job 6, 9 months later, you go, that's not even really what they do anymore. But to
Yeah.
your point, your ability to unlearn, relearn, critically apply is paramount and
Yep.
is only going to get bigger in the next 6 years.
Yeah. We're kind of in a mobile revolution with the mobile phone, but now we quickly move to that AI. And this is the
Yes.
first time that it has lasted in such a short time. Meaning Chat GPT 1 came out in January. By March, they were at 3.5.
We're like four
You
plus
know,
now or
April, May,
whatever.
they were at 4. Yeah. And they tried to, that's why everybody panicked to try to scale it back. But it's so fast now. It's no longer, no longer like what what I mean? It was the industry before industrial revolution. It's
Oh
no
yeah,
longer,
the Industrial
a long
Revolution,
period of
it
time. Yeah,
it took a
took a
long
long
time
time. And
for,
then, yep.
yeah, the industrial
And then we
complex to
started with
get
the
set
dot
up, the assembly
com.
line, all this stuff. People had time to
Yeah.
adapt and change and grow. And now with
Oh yeah.
AI, it's like you took that whole thing and went and squished it into
Pushed
a
it. Yeah.
fraction.
It never in the world has it happened so fast with the negative components that we're not prepared. We have the
Nope.
lowest high school graduation rate than ever before. We have the lowest amount of people entering college ever before. Entering college, they're not even prepared to enter college.
Well, and you
I mean,
said before, one of the stats you quoted before was more than 3 in 4 kids isn't even reading at grade level, which
yeah,
what we said before was reading comprehension and the ability, because you can't apply something if you can't understand it.
I understand it. Right.
So you fundamentally are hamstrung if you cannot
Yeah.
understand it. And so if 3 and 4 are lacking in that area, that fundamentally sets you back big time to be able to thrive in an environment where things are changing all the time. And before you even have time to know what is up from down, the scales have flipped.
Yeah. And we're talking comprehension at the highest level because AI can spit out facts and summarize things for you and kind of guide you in a way, right? So we're talking comprehension at a higher level and then also creativity,
Yep.
communication and collaboration. We're no longer a society where you have the smartest person and they're developing something, working hard on something. That person without social skills is useless. And
Yes.
Apple, I remember even when they were, rolling out the iPad, I mean, they had a whole team that just worked on the button,
Yep.
the front button, not even the sides, And so they had so many different teams. Then eventually, not only those teams were collaborating amongst themselves, but then they had to collaborate amongst each other to have the final
Yeah.
product. And,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah. And so if you don't
Well,
have
it's
that skill
interesting.
of,
I talked to I have a guest coming on. We did the pre-screen today, and he specifically focuses on helping PE and VC companies assess technology companies for purchase and acquisition and all this stuff. And his role is he specializes in assessing the value of the people. And
wow,
he was sharing, and I'm going to do an episode where we just talk about this, that what you just said right there about you can be the smartest, most technical person on the planet. That actually doesn't hold a lot of value at all. It's your ability to problem solve and interact and collaborate and work together with these other people. And like we've said, deconstruct and reconstruct your learning super fast. And so that's completely disrupted the tech sector where people thought, oh, I'm an ace at Python,
yeah,
I'm untouchable. And all of a sudden, GPT-4 goes, I can outcode you in a heartbeat type of a thing.
yeah. And so how do you use AI and technology as a tool? Just the
Yeah,
same way to use the calculator, like you said. AI can actually help you find errors in your code and help
right.
you have a diversity of code. And so, yeah, I tell people all the time. Now, I do believe technology, like I told my teachers, technology will not replace teachers, but those who use it will replace those who don't. I mean,
Yep.
you just have to be comfortable with technology. You have to understand how to use it. It's not something to be afraid of. Um,
No.
but there's aspects of automation that those jobs will no longer be there. And
Yes.
I think we talked before, like we're we're very we're not that far away from automated cars.
No.
So even when we talk about, truck drivers make pretty good money, it's a good living. And I almost think I forgot what the numbers were, but it was like of the economy, the truck drivers was almost up there in the 50 and 60% of of the economy in a sense, and they will be replaced. Once you have automated cars, again, we're close to that. Then of course you're going to have that automated trucks, automated unloading of the trucks. I talked about before that there was and I still forgot the person's name, but I think it's called Patty. It's a robot that actually flips burgers, and it
Okay.
only costs $30,000. And so now restaurants are buying this, but this is Patty doesn't get sick, doesn't have workman's
Right.
comp,
Doesn't call
work
in sick,
24
doesn't show
hours
up
a day.
late,
Yeah, I mean consistent, like
doesn't get
not
distracted on its
killing.
phone, doesn't have to be taught how to assemble, all this other stuff.
Right, and it's only $30,000, which is the price of a person's salary.
Right. Right.
That's That's and so or if you say, okay, that's blue collar. Well, if you look at a doctor, like a surgeon, now utilizes robotics to do surgery.
Yep.
Like they have technology that uses AI that can detect and recommend a treatment for breast cancer, which
Yep.
breast cancer, if you get it more than once, it's not not a good situation.
No, I was with
And
GE. I was
so
with GE Healthcare, and I was involved with a lot of the AI diagnostic stuff, and it was fundamentally disrupting healthcare because
yeah,
so many doctors. And going back to kind of the constant theme in this, and then I want to transition to how this is, what do we do, especially, and why you care so much about what you're doing with PlaBook. But what it was I was seeing so much fear in the physicians who had committed their whole lives to getting really good at detecting things in scans. And all of a sudden, a machine could more accurately and much more rapidly come up with the same diagnosis, and helping them
yeah,
see that it's not that what you bring to the table isn't valuable anymore, but where you've placed all your chips in the past, you just need to move them. Like your job is no
yeah,
longer going to be staring at the scan for countless hours. Your job is going to be looking at what the AI detects and then determining, how do I now work with this patient through this, and thinking through more the interpersonal and the problem solving side of things. And it was a huge change for physicians who
oh
went,
yeah,
oh, AI is never gonna, I've been doing this for 30 years. And I'm like, AI has been trained on every scan on the planet ever. It's going to beat you. It's going to beat you.
yeah. Yeah. So how do you
Yeah.
communicate that, right? The findings.
Right.
How do you communicate the findings? How do how do you look? And so it doesn't eliminate you, but it does eliminate a lot of you in a
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
And now you're one person managing, a lot of this information. Um, even in my MBA course, one of my classes, I, I have a cohort, and one of she's a medical doctor, and we were all on a Zoom call. And I mean, this is really irrelevant, but we were all on a Zoom call, and one of our teammates were sick, and the doctor leaned in and was like, are you okay? But I felt like, I mean, it was so comforting. I felt like she was talking to me. I wanted to respond. And then I teased her and she said, yeah, we do virtual calls. We have to work on how do we become relatable
Yes.
virtually. And I was, man, I felt like you was right here with me, the way you leaned
Yep.
in and, the tonation, you looked into the camera. But yeah, I mean, yeah, man,
And that's the
it,
part that's just a
technology,
huge shift that I know I spend a lot of time trying to educate both employees on, but also business leaders on, because it is important for people to understand, hey, your work is going to change. And what you even just described right there, your ability to now connect with other people becomes the differentiator. As a physician, before you were busy looking at scans and filling out charts and doing all this other stuff, and you never had time for the patient. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, no, now AI is going to be doing a lot of this for you to really stand out above the rest. It's about how well do you now connect with that patient? How well do you make them feel safe with what they're going through? How well do you do? And those are skills that, as long as we're still dealing with people, which isn't going away, that's really what's going to be paramount.
Yep. Same thing
Okay.
as a teacher. I mean, about
Yeah.
facilitating. Now you're able to work on the soft skills and those kind of things within the classroom because you'll have automatic grading, recommendation, personalization, like all those things that you'll have. And it's how do you facilitate that? And then, one of the things that it just hasn't happened yet that will happen, and I think will be a game changer, is really when you have kind of mixed reality or
Yeah.
a real AR or augmented reality on steroids in a sense, to where you can bring to life in your environment and
Yep.
learn, and feels tactile.
Yes.
It seems like you're more of the senses and to involve in learning instead of a one dimensional type of situation. I think that's going to be a game changer, and then also because we have a national teacher shortage, and it's ugly. I mean, really a
It's
national
really
teacher
bad.
shortage, where
It's
we're
really
just putting
bad.
people, we're just checking pulses and allowing people to be in classrooms. Working with one school district that in 8 years they had 0% of kids meet state standards. 0%. But they're
Zero
in an area where
percent.
they have a large teacher shortage, and they have few certified teachers, few certified principals, and those kind of things. But my point is that you're able to utilize technology in a sense to match a student up with the best
Yeah.
teacher and their strength and weaknesses of that student, from anywhere in a
Yeah.
sense, and using augmented reality and virtual reality or mixed reality, to where you can bring that person there, and set that person in the classroom and those kind of things. So I think that's going to be a
Yeah.
game changer, and it has
It
to
will.
happen. There's no other way around. I mean, we have our universities, our colleges of education are being shut down in certain universities because they don't have enough students to fill it. The enrollment is down so much, and so if we just sit back and we wait and don't develop a solution or let someone else develop a solution. What I mean by that is like PowerPoint. PowerPoint is heavily used in schools, but it was developed for businesses.
Yeah.
Zoom it was heavily used in the pandemic, and it was heavily used
Well,
wrong.
I know.
But
So I did
Zoom was not
on the
developed
Zoom
for
one,
education.
full well, but I reached out because I came from the K-12 space. And I remember when the pandemic hit, what a mess it was for my K-12 friends who suddenly went, wait, I'm being asked to use all these different tools I've never used. I'm being asked to engage with students in a way I've never done before. And there's no handbook for this whatsoever. I've just been told teach in Zoom now. And again, like you said, it was a tool built for corporate productivity and collaboration. And yeah, of course, you can use it for different things, but there's a whole skill bend, even going back to your example of the physician who leaned in and even knew how to interact on a different level. It's a skill set. So, yeah, there's
Well,
a
but the
lot.
tools too, though. How do you teach reading Zoom and a young kindergartner? Explain that. You know what I mean? Like, how do you do
Right.
that with a class full of kindergartners on a Zoom? With all the differentiation that happens within there. Yeah, we heard a lot of
Well, and
students in
going
that
back to
process.
what you described, because this kind of gets into where you're leaning in, and I'm really curious how this comes into play with this, because I think we've set the table nicely for how all of these changes, if you draw the line back to like the kids, everything we just described of how work's changing, of all the stuff that's happening here, you go back a generation or two and go, okay, now you're dealing with kids who aren't reading at level. They are, in many cases, not even meeting state standards. Now, how do we prepare them
Right.
for that? We've hit on a lot of this stuff. But to your point on the reading thing, it was difficult enough to do it the old way where it was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to read something to you, or you read it out loud, and then I'm going to test your comprehension. I'm going to give you a multiple choice. It'd still be a nightmare to try and do that via Zoom in an effective way.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
to be able to do it like you're describing, where you're actually understanding the phonetic breakdown, and do you actually comprehend and can you apply what you're reading? Doing that
Right.
over Zoom by itself, especially using analog traditional methods, would be an atrocious user experience for a student.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But if my product was back then in that era, a couple of years ago, it would have been better because the students can, every time that they are reading, independent reading, it gives you that analysis. It gives them recommendations and activities to do that hits the
Okay.
foundational skills. A lot of times, the problem with reading is that children kind of look like the Swiss cheese effect. They have holes in their foundation, and once you plug
Okay.
in those holes, then now you can, now they can read, and it's just a matter of reading a lot that increases the fluency, and then comprehension is there, and then you can work on comprehension. And my tool isolates it to where everyone says, "Oh, it's a reading problem," and again, they're just looking at multiple choice questions, comprehension. One, we can isolate it. No, it's truly a basic reading problem, or it is. There are areas of comprehension that needs to be improved. Inferencing, having background knowledge, understanding main idea, you know, all those kind of things that you want to address later. But we jump the gun with that when we're dealing with teaching students how to read.
So, how did you? I'm really curious how you did this, because I think one of the things that's fascinating about what you just described, you may not have even noticed you did this because you just glossed over it, but I am continually fascinated by how complex some of the things we just so take for granted. So, like reading, like you just described, for someone who reads at an adult level, at a reasonable level, we take for granted how much actually goes into all of that and how complex it is, of how we're taking all these other things. We're actually breaking the words down. We're processing it. We're doing all these different things. And again, having 7 kids who many are just in that stage where they're learning to read, and seeing how transformative it is when they go from I can't read to I can read, their whole world just opens up. But it doesn't happen because you just go, here's the sounds, now put it together. There's so much more going on than just, oh, here's phonetic sounds, jam them together, now they're words. Ta-da, you get it. It's complex.
Do you know why? Because reading is actually not a natural skill. That is something that's newer in our evolution. So you actually have to rewire the brain to learn how to read. The brain is not born designed to read. Most people think, you're born to make sounds. You start cooing and on, and you start talking, and then you walk, and then you read. But that's not the case.
So
And
it's
don't get me
not just
wrong,
this
there are.
natural, just next step like we often assume. Oh, well, you
It's
made
not.
noise, you kind of babble, you crawled, you walked, and then just naturally you read. It's not that
Right,
way.
right. It's not. You have to rewire the brain. It's almost like teaching rocket science. It is complex, and there are some students who will get it, but it's just the same thing as learning how to play the piano. I mean, you have savants that no matter what, I mean, they just learn how to do it, right?
Right.
But majority of the population, they had to have lessons to learn how to play the piano.
And
Is
it took a lot
actually
of
it's
time and effort. It's not like they got one
a lot of
lesson
time
and
and
just
effort,
went, ta-da, now I'm
practice.
playing Mozart type of a thing.
Right. Right. And so it's the same thing with reading. It's not a natural process. You have to rewire the brain. Look at visualization and sound, associating that with words, like and meaning. All those kind of things are not they're parallel, and they actually don't intersect until they're taught to. So yeah, that's one of the main problems is that, and then the way that we used to teach reading is whole language learning, where you memorize a word, look at picture cues. None of that. There's only 5 ways to teach reading, and if you and the problem was we kind of wiped out a whole generation doing that, and words pretty soon you're going to come to words that you have to break down phonetically, and that
Yep.
you didn't have, especially with this generation that don't have the background knowledge. And so, and you look at the advent of poverty. And so a child in poverty is exposed to 300,000 words by the age of 3, but a child in a middle class to a professional household is exposed to 3 million words by the age of 3. And
Wow, that
so
is a
even if you
massive
look at,
difference.
yeah, oh yeah. So even if you look at the background knowledge, all those kind of things. And that's why everybody's kind of afraid about the have and have nots. One is skill, two is, availability to capital, because all the automation jobs, there's not going to be a middle class in a sense, because all those automation jobs right now that's supporting even like I said, a truck driver, that's supporting the workforce right now will be taken over. Anything that you can do automatically is, it's going to be taken over by technology in that sense. And so, if we don't reskill, if we don't teach different, provide students with different opportunities to really utilize technology in the right way. Even technology right now, like I said, there's 4 C's: critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration. Those are the skills that need to be direct taught. The other issue is that they're saying that uh, one class that's going to be harder hit is your upper middle class
Yeah,
um, schools, because they feel like they're doing it right. They are in today's standards, and
by today's
so
standards.
they're, yeah, they're winning right now, where everyone else is trying to figure out, because they're so far down, they feel the pinch, and they're in crisis mode, and they're looking at different ways to utilize technology.
Which is
A lot of
interesting
people use.
because this is actually creating opportunity for people to leapfrog. And I've actually seen
Yeah,
this multiple times where that that class of people you're talking about that's feels safe and is like, yeah, I kind of don't, that complacency that's kicking in and being like, I'm untouchable, is actually creating opportunity for people to leapfrog over it because technology is enabling it. And it's just like what you see in big corporations who thought, oh, I'm GE or I'm Ford or shit, like I can't be touched. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, someone comes up and just completely supersedes them and they didn't even see it coming.
yeah, Kodak, Sears, yeah,
Right.
all those companies have become
Yeah. Kodak,
obsolete,
that was
right?
like, people will always be taking pictures.
Yeah,
Well, that's
Xerox.
true, but not the way you think.
Well, actually, Kodak came up with the first digital camera.
Oh, I do remember that. And they
Yeah,
kind of like,
but they,
didn't they
but
just kind of
but
like
they made
toss the
so
idea
much
out?
money
Like,
off. They made so much money off film, developing film, that they didn't want to leave their core product.
yeah.
I mean, same thing. Blockbuster, right? Like they had the
Yep.
opportunity to buy
Blockbuster,
Netflix.
same thing. People will always come to the rental stores because they love it. No, they didn't. They
Yeah,
hated it.
yeah. And so if you don't, yeah, so if you get comfortable because you're winning right now, and you don't look ahead, then yeah, you cause a problem. When the rate of change happens faster outside of an organization than it does inside of an organization, the end is near. And so the rate of change of the world is faster than what's going on in education.
Okay.
And so those who are not feeling that pinch. So, for instance, the utilization of technology in more affluent or upper middle class school systems, again, they're preparing kids for SAT, SAT. I mean, that's multiple choice. Kind of, it's complex reading.
Yep.
It's not easy. It's not what I'm saying, but in
I know what you're getting
in
at.
lower yeah, in lower middle class schools, they're looking at, okay, problem based learning. Like, okay, how do we have problem based learning? How do we utilize technology instead of point and click and gaming? How do we utilize
Yep.
it to create, right? To
Yeah.
tools to advance, to communicate, like all those kind of things. Those skills, like you said, are actually going to leapfrog and lead,
Yep.
and everybody else is going to be that Blockbuster or that Kodak, or that have access to the same information, but are just sold on their core product because they're winning.
Yeah. Well, and I see this happen a lot, especially when it comes to, corporate learning, learning and development as a whole, where, and I get it. I think what's interesting about kids versus adults is one of the biggest challenges I run into with adults is often they've built so much of their identity into what they did. Their identity has
Mm.
almost become intertwined with the work activity that they do. And so when suddenly the thought of, well, you're not going to have to do that anymore, it almost feels so threatening to them, which I'm curious, and this is my follow-up question to you, but it almost feels like a part of them is dying to which is it's a fascinating psychological phenomenon to watch where you go, you think because you're not going to have to create PowerPoints anymore, you're no longer but
Yeah.
they've so intertwined their being with creating these PowerPoints they can't. So I'm actually curious with this as I think about the challenge you have in the academic system. Not only do you have the students who you have to change and adapt for, and I think the technology can be a great enabler of this, but going back to in theory versus in practice, you now are dealing with teachers who may be running the risk of going through the same identity crisis I see on the corporate front where they go, wait, I don't want to adopt this technology because I've built my identity on being what I've defined as a teacher. And this technology fundamentally changes what that looks like. I have to imagine there's some resistance there.
Yeah. Oh, you know what's resistance? It's almost like when I used to be a professor, and you had those professors that had notes and the way they taught their class 30 years ago,
Yeah.
and are still teaching their class and using the same because it's uncomfortable to change.
Change.
Yeah, and at least in that point, people are, you have adults, learners in a sense, who are more patient. So imagine that in the classroom where you have a teacher that is just a talking head, literally, literally, the unfortunate part of it is back in the days where if you were watching TV, you had to sit through that commercials and everything.
You
You
had
had
to.
what, three
Yeah, there
channels,
was
you
no way
had
around.
12
It was
channels.
funny. I was watching a
There's
show
no
with
way
my kids
around.
the other day. Dude Perfect came out with an app. And I don't know if you know anything about this, but it's a show we like to watch on YouTube. They do trick shots and all these funny things. And they came out with an app which sounded great. But when you download the app, we have YouTube Premium, so you don't have to watch ads. We watch it on the app and it's ads. And my kids were just like, what is this? Why can't
Yeah.
you fast forward it, Daddy? And I'm like, I can't. This is what a commercial, and it was such a foreign concept to them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I get so frustrated with the ESPN app. I love it. It gives you snapshots, but after every 30-second, 40-second clip, it's a video. And it's like, come on, guys. I love you guys. I
Yeah,
want to see the next clip. And I'm
yeah,
like you said, and I'm an adult. So imagine kids who they're bored, they can change the channel, they can
yeah.
fast forward the streaming, or they can pay, I call it
Right. They are
luxury tax and
so
eliminate
ingrained.
commercials.
They are so
Yeah,
ingrained with this. I want it my way. I don't
yep,
want to have to deal with
yeah,
this. And you running into a generation of teachers who are gone, hey, this is how I teach the class. I've been doing it since whatever.
right.
And I'm not really
Bueller,
interested. Yeah,
Bueller.
Bueller. Right, right,
Remember
exactly.
Ferris
And the kids are
Bueller?
like, I ain't got
Like
time for this.
Bueller. Like, yeah, it's like the clear eye guy. Like they're bored and they can't change that teacher.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out ways to engage kids and then personalize it. It's just like even let's go with reading. Who says, like, let's say a school's a 45-minute block of reading, you have 45-minute block of math or whatever. But
Yep.
who determined that 45 minutes is what someone needed to learn how to read? What if I need 46 minutes and to have that aha moment and you close
Right.
the book? What if I needed 10 minutes? I gotta
Right.
I gotta board the rest of the time and sit there with people. You know,
I
like
I know exactly what you're talking about because I was that kid that wanted to hit skip, or be like, I got it type of a thing. And it's like, well, but we got to fill the rest of the time. And I bring that into the corporate lens where it's like, well, we've got this leadership course and it's 8 hours long. And it's like, why is it 8 hours long? Who said eight
right,
hours? But yeah, you got a
right.
generation that's grown up on this hyper personalization because
Yeah,
everything has moved that way.
Yeah, and we just start checking boxes. Like even the example of the corporate training, where you have to do those modules. I mean, you really can look online and get the answers to a lot of them.
You can ask Chat
You know,
GPT and probably get it
you
in
can ChatGPT to get the answer.
two
So
seconds.
you're just kind of walking away as the video is playing, clicking through, everything
Yep.
that you're supposed to learn, and then you take an assessment, at
Yeah.
the end to advance. I mean, I've been through many of them, but yeah, I mean, those answers are online even before ChatGPT. Their answers, the answers
Well, yeah, you could have
were
just Googled
online.
it. But what's
Yeah,
interesting about this, and this gets back to kind of what you're talking about, even with what you're doing with the reading app, but even the shift in education and the way we do it. One of the problems I've always had, and it's actually why I left academia, because some of the things we're talking about, while the awareness of it and the focus on it is new, I wouldn't say like it was great and wonderful back in the old days, but now it's just not. It just was more like, well, what else were you going to do type of a thing. And
different learning.
now because people have options, because what you're getting at, and one of the frustrations I always had was the traditional model of education says, to your point, what goes way back to our beginning, read this thing, answer these questions. That doesn't really tell you anything about someone's ability to critically process, think about it, apply it, do anything with it. It's just a matter of can you rote recall whatever was just said to you type of a thing. And we're now
Right.
moving to this age of I'm actually doing my live stream tomorrow that I'm doing on this. I'm talking about the age, we're moving into the age of action learning, where learning is going
Yeah,
to be all about action and what you can do and how can you apply and how is that measured. And that's changing a lot because
oh,
it's
yeah.
no longer about, well, how much do you know? Well, we don't really care how much you know because AI knows more than any human will ever know. What we care about is, do you know what to do with that information? That's really what we care about.
Well, we knew a long time ago that there was a gap between those multiple choice tests and how come I
Right.
never do this in my real job? Like when I grow up, you mean I'm going to be taking tests every day or no? No, it's totally different. And
Yeah.
so it was just yeah, and so we have to change, man. We and it's a sense of urgency, and a lot of people are not feeling it right now. Like I said, because they're being successful in the system that we have, or the illusion of success, because the
Yes.
numbers are there with the graduation. I mean, we have high schools that are considered dropout factories. Like they only graduate 30% of their students. 30%.
Wow.
That's that's not even a success rate. Like that's you can't even get happy about that. But that's the norm, and it's a large population of our in our school systems. And so, yeah, I mean, we have to figure out how to engage students, how to deliver information and knowledge. Like you said, whether it's performance based or you call it action based, or you know, because the other thing that's different is that again these kids are digital natives, so you can go to a restaurant
Yes.
and you can see a 1 year old, you can see a baby in a crib, and they have a phone or a tablet with a little foam around it
My
or whatever,
10
and they're
month old
manipulating.
sits, it drives me nuts sometimes when she sits on my lap because she flicks through my Apple Watch. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like,
They're
you don't
born to do
even know.
this. They're
Yeah,
born
they
to
just
do
like,
it.
no, right? I'm like, you're not even a year old and you know to
Yeah,
scroll through my watch. It's bizarre. But
yeah,
yeah, it's so entrenched in the fabric of their existence.
yeah. So they're different learning style. Like you said before, we had different motivation and we had a different way to receive information. And now, because the information is so vibrant to children, starting them off on digital aspects like that, and then we want a child to come to school, sit in a desk, and do a worksheet. Yeah, okay. Or someone just talking to death. You know, good luck with that,
Yeah.
right? Or someone that's just sitting there talking you to death, and they already have the habit. We as adults have this same habit of looking at
Yep.
their phones, and then once they go through it, and they're seeing clips, and they're seeing, and it's just all these things um that that children are getting exposed to, and we're not giving it to them, and so Yeah, that's why we're not reaching them. That's why we have a large percent of students who are being unsuccessful within our school system. Our gifted kids are also our newer at-risk population, by the way. They're dropping out faster than anybody. They're bored
Really?
to death.
Well, and in some ways that doesn't surprise me because I think it's one of those testaments to the new generation. And I'm seeing this. I talk to a lot of Gen Zers and now whatever. I think the next generation is Generation Alpha. I think they've moved to like Greek. I think it's Generation Alpha. But the tolerance for, well, this is just how it has to be, is going down. So it actually, in some ways, doesn't surprise me that even some of the gifted kids are going, this is stupid. I'm not gonna participate in this institution that's broken and doesn't seem interested in changing, and I'd rather just go my own way, type of a thing.
Yeah, I mean the other aspect of it is a gift that everybody has access to that information that that teacher is delivering, and if you're a higher level learner, you can do that on your own,
Yeah, you'll go do it
and
yourself. You don't need to go to
you
school to
probably
get
already
it.
have. Yeah,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
you want to be challenged. You want to be challenged like the next kid, but that opportunity is not afforded to you.
Well, coming into the home stretch of this, though, because I think we've hit on this has been such a fun conversation. I really appreciate you making the time. I think one of the encouraging things, because somebody could easily listen to this. And so if you've tuned in this long, hopefully we haven't scared you off and going like, oh my word, this just sounds like horrific. Because one of the constant themes that encourages me through this, though, is despite all the chaos, despite all that's changing, despite all that may seem frightening and terrifying, there are constant threads that flow throughout it. And
Mhm.
I think one of the things that we're realizing more and more is those constant threads are what really matter. And we've often been distracted with this other stuff. And we thought these were really the things that mattered. And suddenly we're going, hey, these things actually don't matter at all, which can give that impression of, oh no, everything's going away. And it's like, no, underneath that was a constant thread that actually wove those three things together that you maybe didn't even pay attention to. The
Yeah,
things we talked about: reading, comprehend, understanding how to read, understanding and knowing how to communicate and connect and collaborate with people, how to problem solve. And that's a consistent thread that, yes, maybe the way you used to do it looked like this, and now that doesn't exist anymore. Okay. But you are still going to be doing these things over here. And if we focus on those foundational skills, whether you're an adult or the next generation, that's actually what's going to be, going back to the theme of the show, future proof. That's actually what's going to future proof you. That is
yeah.
how you stay
Reskilling,
future proofed.
and as an adult, reskilling.
Yeah.
Um, Automation is not necessarily eliminating jobs; it's repurposing jobs. So, for instance, don't be fooled by McDonald's that has the automated system at first. If you get in trouble, then the real person listens to the speakerphone. They're training that. They're training that model to where they're going to eliminate the adults,
Yep.
and they're going to eliminate the people at the window. But and that's why they have you do your app. You're going to be able to order the app. I don't know. Patty's going to flip it, put it on a bun, and serve it to you. But who programs that technology? Who repairs that technology?
Right.
Who keeps it clean? Like, is repurposing jobs,
Yes.
is repurposing jobs and reskilling yourself, and you have to be okay with reskilling. The problem
Yes.
is falling behind and not wanting to change. Like, that's gonna be your Achilles
That's going to
heel.
be
And
your Achilles heel. That will
yeah,
be your Achilles heel. And here's what's also interesting. I had a conversation, I think it was a couple months ago, with someone, and we were talking about this. And what's also really interesting as you study human behavior is there's this store that is recognizing that some customers really love going to the store because that is their social interaction. That is
yes,
the way they interact, and they love it. And so this whole like automated checkout was a store that did this whole experiment on this, and they found they were actually losing customers when they only had automated checkouts, because some people came to that store because they loved this. And what they actually did, and this was a fascinating experiment that they did, was they actually created a career path for checkout people. There was the person that was responsible for making sure that the automated checkout was there, because we've all done that. You scan the thing wrong and you're like, oh, but that person was
Right.
trained in how to de-escalate, and they focused on how to really create a compelling customer experience, because that person's goal is to get in and out as quickly as possible. And so that person's goal is, your goal is to be trained on how do you as quickly as possible do this while demonstrate this. But then they also trained some of their checkout people. They were the master communicators, and they actually had 2 lanes that were the long lanes. And it was not about speed. It was about, you were there to interact with the people in the line with you. You were there to interact with the checkout counter. And that was the lane you went to. And people would stand in these long lines for it. But it actually became a career pathway where they were actually to pay people more, a livable wage. They needed less people, but they now paid these cashiers a livable wage. And it was something you aspired to. If you were an extrovert who loved to interact and was really good with your social skills, you wanted the long lane. That was like what you strive for. And they saw their numbers grow. But again, it took the store going, let's just rethink this whole thing. And rather than
Yeah.
just say, let's throw in a bunch of automated checkouts, or no, we're never going to have automated checkouts, let's recognize people have a different experience when they come to our stores. And how do we use technology to create the best experience possible? And I went, that is absolutely incredible on some of the things that we can expect as we move into the future.
No, you're right. I mean, you're right. There's some arguments to say that's kind of our generation, and then there's the younger generation who they just want automation. But the reality of it is, from a psychology standpoint, is relationships are so important.
Yep.
And when you talk about happiness and satisfaction in life, it's always built around relationships. Like, let's say my mother, for instance, um, she doesn't have, she goes to water class or water aerobics, and
Yeah.
that's her circle.
Yeah.
It's doing something around that, is doing something that everybody else is doing in a cohort, in a group. And it doesn't, she doesn't, go out to eat with these ladies or
Yeah.
this, that, and the other. But man, I mean, that is, relationship. Same thing. She goes to one certain grocery store and they know her and she know them. Right. And so, and
Yep.
that's why she goes. She can go anywhere. She kind of goes out of her way to go to this grocery store. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's like you said, it's meeting the needs of more
Yeah.
than one, and diversifying your approach to saying, no, we're not going to be totally automated. And there's still a large population, still a large audience that wants to connect. And we have,
Well, and it,
that's the other thing. We still have to figure out how to connect, right?
yes.
Because we see some of the lack of social skills that our kids, and stuff are having,
Yep.
because they believe that every friend, on social media is their friend. Or
Yeah.
even sometimes I get like that. I'm saying, didn't I talk to you? And my wife's like, no, we text. Like, I felt like it was a conversation. Like,
Yeah.
I heard you,
Yeah.
you know, because you just start to do that,
Yep.
and you start to replace it with real live
Yeah.
interaction, and those kind of things.
But understanding how that all fits together. And I think that's where um, I continue to be encouraged by, I talk to lots of people from all over on things, and I look at it and go, there are so many problems in the world that we still have to solve. There is so much stuff that still needs to be accomplished. It's not going anywhere. It's just going to change, and it's going to look very different. And I have really enjoyed this conversation about what that might look like, some of the challenges we face, some of the opportunities that lie ahead. And I think it's honestly, I think it's absolutely fantastic that you're taking the skills and gifts that you've built and been given over the years and using it to pay it forward to that next generation that is going to be the one that helps define some of this. And I think it's really critically important right now, because as adults, sometimes it's so easy to get so focused on what's at the end of our nose and not
Mhm.
think multi-generationally. And again, as a
Yeah.
dad, it's something I'm keenly aware of, is it's like the decisions I make about technology today are going to affect my kids and my grandkids and their kids, and that matters. So,
Yeah.
Phil, I have so enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you making the time, and I absolutely love the work you're doing. So thank you for joining me on here.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation. You're right. This was excellent, man. This was food for my soul.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening, watching, wherever you're consuming this. I look forward to having you come back. And thank you again, Dr. Phil, and we will see you on the other side.